I was born in Melton Mowbray, which at that time in the UK, at that time, that was a little town of 15,000 people with one church, one chapel, one fish and chip shop, and one grocer's shop, what we call a grocery store, which was still, like you come into the shop and there's a wooden counter and you stand there and they go in the back and you read off your list and they bring you the things. And back then, I was born in 1951, end of 51. Back then, in Melton, ladies still put silk dresses with long sleeves to go have tea with each other. It was a different world. And my family was quite unusual. Most people would have been born and brought up in Melton, and my parents were both from London. My mother was born in a slum in South London, and she was in the Anglican. That's like Episcopalian in the American way. But we have found out that my mother is partly Indian, from India, that her grandmother was from Trinidad, and those Indians were brought over to Trinidad as indentured workers in the rice fields or sugarcane fields. And she fell in love and was brought to London. And she had to be kept indoors because she would become so dark in her color, which was not cool in that time and place. My father is Jewish, and he was born, I think he was sort of born in the suburbs, but his parents were born in the ghetto. It wasn't really a ghetto, like a ghetto with a wall and a gate, but the people that... Okay, we have to really go back to Ruchel and Yoina, my great-grandparents. When they were 16, the Cossacks were coming into Poland, and a group of young people left, and they walked out of Poland. And they walked to Germany. And they wanted to settle in Germany, but the German Jews didn't want them. They didn't want these illiterate peasants. Actually, my great-grandfather wasn't illiterate, but, uneducated Yiddish-speaking peasants to come and join them. So they kept walking, which saved our lineage, right? They wanted to settle in Germany. They had to keep walking all the way to the coast. And then if you had some money or some relatives with money, you went steerage to America. And if you were really, really poor, you just got on a boat and you didn't know the difference between Ireland and England. Some of them landed in Dublin. Some of them landed in London. My great-grandparents landed in London. And then everybody started living in the Dockland right there. My grandmother said that, she said when we were little we had very nice seders, but then the Russian Jews came later who were communist, and they said that we shouldn't do that because it was superstition. So after that we stopped. So my grandparents were very much into being Jewish, such as my grandmother would only play bridge with other Jewish ladies, but they weren't into any kind of religious or observant aspects of it, at least until my grandfather's death. So I was really born into this very puzzling, confusing setting. I remember I had a great-grandmother who didn't really speak English, who was only 4'10", who would hug me and say, "You are so good, I could eat you," which was almost all she could say to me. And I didn't know what it was about. Eventually, when I turned 8, I said to my father, "Where does Great Granny come from?" And that was answered in a series of walks, that we took walks every evening, and it went back to Ur of the Chaldees. And he started telling this whole story. I'm like, what's this got to do with Great Granny? And, then it went through the whole story of the Jewish people, and then they got to Poland, and then I found out, your great-granny's Jewish? And I was a precocious reader, so I was reading some novel by Walter Scott in which there was a Jewess, and for some reason I identified with the beautiful Jewess in the novel, and I thought it must be very romantic to be Jewish. And then my great-grandmother's Jewish, and I said, oh, I always wanted to be a Jew. And my dad said, you see before you, a Jew. And then my mother said, but you're not Jewish because you're my daughter. And I thought that was like, my dad's Jewish. I'm Jesus' cousin. I'm related to Yehudi Menuhin, my hero, because I was a violinist, and Yehudi Menuhin was my idol, like my football star or whatever. I thought it was really exciting. And then my parents said, don't tell anyone. So that's when I started to understand about conflicts and divisions. And then I came to understand that my grandparents didn't like that my mother was a Gentile. And my grandparents would say things like, you're going to be really mixed up because you have two kinds of blood mixing in you, and you're bound to have a lot of problems. And then also, we had school scripture lessons, so I was also finding out in the school scripture lessons, which were totally Christian, about how Jews killed Jesus and they had been cursed by this. And you had to, in order to go to heaven, you had to be Christian. So I was, just as a little small child, I was right in this clash of cultures and religions. One set of relatives who all talked with their hands, and the way a conversation went on was one person, and then the other person interrupted mine, and then the other person interrupted. My grandfather always got the last word because he could talk the loudest, and that was what a conversation was. And then you went to English family, and everyone was polite, called each other Mr. and Mrs. We had to call everyone auntie and uncle. It was really different. So the cultures and the faith traditions and the loss of faith, that I was too young to connect that to the Holocaust. I don't think I really knew about the Holocaust. I was growing up in that. Okay, so when I was 12, I was in church and I had an experience that happened to also Anthony of Egypt and Francis of Assisi. And maybe it's happened to many other people, but it's recorded that it happened to them. They were reading a specific passage from the gospel that said, take nothing with you when you go. Don't have any shoes, don't have 2 coats, don't carry a sandwich box, just go. And I looked around, and this is England in the 50s, or maybe by then it's the early 60s. Everyone has a hat, a church hat. Everyone's wearing their Sunday best. And I looked around and I thought, they're not doing it. And I thought, and I will do it. I will do this. So then I was so disillusioned with belonging to a church that had been founded because a king wanted to get divorced, that then when I was 17, I converted and I became Catholic. And this was, I think this was less than 100 years since the Catholic Relief Act. So Catholics have been really persecuted in England. And me becoming Catholic as a teenager got the same kind of reception as if I'd had an abortion or been on drugs. It was kind of a scandal in the town, but I did it anyway. Partly because I thought, I want to be a nun, and there's not much choice of being nun in the Church of England. So it'll be better if I become Catholic, I'll be able to be a nun. That was mainly because I had seen nuns in my small town in their brown brown habits and their veils, and I thought they prayed all the time. Actually, they were school teachers, I think. Okay, so I became a nun, and then, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I was going to be a nun. And then my parents wanted me to be a professor. But then I had another of these experiences where I had been out rowing, and I was walking along to the boathouse, and I had an oar on each shoulder, and suddenly this voice came out of the heavens and said, "You will be a healer. You'll heal people like Jesus did, and you'll go to a distant land and be a healer." So I came home and I said, I'm going to be a doctor. And so that's what I did. I went to medical school, St. Bartholomew's Hospital Medical School, which is a top London medical school. I went to the same medical school where my grandfather had been a lab technician. But I just told them my grandfather had been there, and I think they probably thought he'd been a doctor and not a lab technician. So I got in, even despite how snobbish that society is. So I went all through medical school, but from the beginning of clinical, it wasn't really what I wanted to do. But I like to finish things when I start them. So I went all through medical school, but while I was in medical school, I went and lived in a convent, and I became like a postulant, which is the first step of being a nun. So I was in medical school and being a postulant, and I was commuting from Kensington Square, upscale end of London, to east end of London, where the hospital was. And I would do my prayers and everything that you had to do as a nun, and then I'd drink coffee and stay up till 11 in the library studying for medical school, and then I'd get up at 5:30 or 6 for my prayers, and that's how medical school was. So I finished all of medical school, and I did my, in England then you have to do a year of your rotations. So you're working, I got good rotations, which meant I only worked 80 hours a week instead of 100. So you're on your little prayer stool, and you're trying to meditate, you're like, and then your beeper goes, and you got to run. So at this point, I decided I couldn't get contemplation and action together. So after I finished everything for my full registration as a physician, I went and joined a Cistercian abbey, the same order as Thomas Merton. So I was there for, I think it was a year and a half. And that abbey is now closed. It was extremely old-fashioned. Everyone in there had been, in my entire lifetime, the youngest nun had been that whole time in the abbey. So they had never experienced the postmodern world, the world of after Hiroshima, the world that could cease to be on a count of 10. They had never experienced that world that I grew up in. So that I think that's why it closed, was because they couldn't relate to what I see as a new kind of human that came forth after that experience. Our generation and younger. So I left there. And I think the other reason why I left was because I had never in my whole life not been around Jewish people before. I was very culturally different. They couldn't really understand. I was back to these clashes and trying to pick one side, one stream of ancestry didn't work. So I left there, and then I didn't know what to do. I was working as a play therapist for a girl with developmental disabilities. And I was living in London, and then my little sister came to see me. I was doing a lot of art at the time. She looked at my art and she said, I've just been to an exhibition of Indian art, and that's what you're doing. You're doing Indian art, you better go to India. And it struck home so much so that I immediately bought a ticket to India. Because I knew she was right, I had to go to India. So in 1980, I went to India. I'm just trying to answer your question, but it's a little hard to answer it. So in 1980, I went to India.
This can be the interview. Just keep telling
Okay.
me.
I have one address, which is Bede Griffiths, Dom Bede Griffiths, Shantivanam, South India. So I went to India with this one address, and I arrived in this coconut grove on the Kaveri River in South India, in this place that had been founded by Benedictine monks who were searching for something beyond institutional monasticism. And I went there to find, my plan at 28 was that I would go to India, I would uncover the roots in India of Christian monasticism. I'd stay there for 3 months, I'd know all about it. I'd go back to London and I'd create my own thing, because then I would know what to do. So I got to Shantivanam and a few things happened. I was there for 3 months. I studied with Bede Griffiths. Within the first 2 weeks, I met someone. I met a young man. And I had known for about 2 weeks before I met him that I was going to meet him. My inner voice started saying, now you're going to meet your soulmate, and you're going to spend your whole lives together. And so it's kind of like, well, who is it going to be? And suddenly this young man appeared he had matted locks. He had a rat hole in his lungi, his waist. He was bare-chested in a waistcloth with a rat hole in it, and he had a musical instrument. And my inner voice said, this person you're going to spend, this is your soulmate, you're going to spend your whole life, this is your spiritual companion. So we were both in the same place for about 3 months, and we talked a little bit, and he suggested that I go to Pune, and then he took off. We didn't exchange an address. I just, he went off to one place in India, I went off to another place in India. He had sent me to the Krista Prema Seva Ashram in Pune, in Maharashtra, which was another ashram founded by Christians who wanted to experience something outside institutional monasticism. They were Protestant and Catholic nuns with a Franciscan lineage. So I arrived there. I decided to stay there I was staying there for 9 months. And I'd been there for a couple of weeks. And the young man, then called Francis, now called Sadanand, appeared with a girl who then left him. So all this was unfolding. And then he introduced me to his guru. And when we think of guru nowadays, we tend to think of darshan lines, queuing up, ashrams, robes, something like a church or a cult. He introduced me to a very simple old man who lived in a little cave temple, who had no robes, had no ashram, had no formalized teachings. There was no queue for darshan. There were no initiations, and you could only find him if you were lucky. It was lucky. And so Sadanand brought me to meet this old man. And he came out from his cave. And out from his cave walked the person that I always knew was there. And that I had spent hours and hours on the floor in the abbey crying because I wanted to meet this person. And there he was. He was just so simple. And everything that I had read about in the Gospels was standing there. alive, the gospel come to life. And it was an elderly Hindu guru whose main disciples were Muslims, Muslim family, with his main disciple and translator. And then he said to me, Yeshu and I are one. Don't worry. Yeshu, meaning Jesus, Yeshu and I are one. So then this tension that I had come into since my birth got more and more and more intense, actually, because everything, all the identifications, I was a nice Catholic doctor, English girl, nun with a Jewish father, and it all was coming apart because I was in love with this Hindu-Buddhist American and this Hindu guru in different ways. So for quite a lot of time, I was just going to go and see Raghudas I would go at least once a week, and it's just him and me, and we just sit in silence. We couldn't share a word in common. He didn't speak English, I didn't speak any Marathi. It's a very difficult language, one of the most difficult languages. So we'd just sit there and meditate. I'd arrive, I'd meditate, he'd bless me, he'd give me a sweetie, and I'd leave. And then Sadanand asked me to go on pilgrimage with him. And we were going to just set off and go to the Himalayas. And then I was going to go and be a hermit. So we were going to go to the Himalayas, and then he was going to take me to find a hermitage. And we would go our separate ways. And all of that was going to happen that year. But it's India. So we were on a pilgrimage together for 5 years. Wandering the roads of India with a begging bowl, essentially. And one change of white sari. Not quite as nice. Every time one white sari I had wore out to where I couldn't don it anymore, someone would give me another one. So we were wandering around like this on pilgrimage, going to ashrams and meditating and going to pilgrimage places. And the window is very small for going to the Himalayas. You have to get there between May and September. So every time something would stop us, and that's why it took 5 years before we got to the Himalayas. In the meantime, my guru had given me the name, Alakananda, and we went to the Himalayas, and we went to the Alakananda River at Badrinath, it's a Himalayan torrent that's rushing down from the high peaks. So I did this pilgrimage to my name. And then Sadananda, because he was an illegal alien in India, he got his quit India notice. And we came to America, where I'd never been before. We flew in, and I looked down. We were flying into New York, and I looked down, and I saw this thing that was all square. And I said, my God, what's that? And he said, it's New York City. I'd never seen a square city before. I'd never known a street that was called by a number before. Streets in my hometown are called Butter Market and Rope Walk and St. Stephen's and like this. Now I live on a street that's a number. The grid system is cool. You can figure out where you are. You don't get lost. So I came to this like totally alien culture from the land of bullock carts to the land of pickup trucks, to the Wild West, to Denver. The culture shock of India was nothing to me compared to the culture shock of America. I completely hated it here for 7 years. All I could think of for 7 years was how to get back to India, how to get away from here, how to get back to India. I didn't want to be here. And just as we nearly had our plans consolidated to get away, we moved into this little house, which is a rental house. But we actually, in Boulder, Colorado, but we actually It's actually a duplex, and we moved into the basement, which is a sort of a 2-room place. Well, it has a living room, kitchen, and then it has 2 other rooms, but it seemed huge to us compared to where we had been before, because there was a room with a door to be our temple. And so we had the luxury of and there was another room with a door we could close to be a bedroom. So it was a huge amount of luxury. So we moved into that little place, and that was the beginning of Alandi Ashram. We'd have 45 people coming for dinner and chanting. It was as if the walls were elastic. Everyone could come. Everyone could be fed. One time I cooked a meal for 15 people, and 35 people arrived, and we fed them all. Everyone got food. Everyone got to chant. So we were doing this. But we were ready to go to India, but then we met Sheikh Nur, also known as Lex Hickson. He came to Boulder, we met him. We told him, well, we're going to leave now and go to India. And he said, you can't leave, we've only just met. And we've never left. And we would want to move, and he would say, where would you find such a comfortable place? So we've been in this place forever since we met Sheikh Nur. So that was the next step. At this point, I was a Hindu-Christian, and I'd gotten somewhat comfortable with being a Hindu-Christian and doing little fire ceremonies that we do in the morning and the evening. So I became a Hindu-Christian. And then we met Sheikh Nur, and this whole Sufi thing started happening. So we took bayat, we took hand, we entered the Sufi order of the Halvati Jirahi dervishes with Sheikh Nur. So then I was a Hindu-Christian Sufi. And we also started spending more and more time at the Boulder Shambhala Center. So then I was a Hindu-Christian Sufi-Buddhist. So at this point, we're in probably 1993. I could go into any church, temple, or mosque in the world and be fully accepted as a member of that religion. But I was petrified to go into a synagogue because of not being accepted. Because I'm a patrilineal Jew, as were Ephraim and Manasseh, in fact. Their mother was an Egyptian princess. So it doesn't make any sense to me, but there we go. And at that point, Sadananda and I both started I had a dream about Moses. I met Moses, and he poured the blood of the covenant on me. It was a pretty important dream. All this blood was splashed on me. And then Sadananda also had a dream about the Jewish tradition, and we told those to our sheikh. And he had lost, being in New York, he had lost several dervishes to charismatic rabbis like Rabbi Shlomo and so on. So he said, well, don't go around these Orthodox rabbis because they'll take you away. But Reb Zalman is going to come to Boulder to teach at Naropa, and I'm going to pay for you to take every class he teaches. So we sort of did practically, through continuing ed, we practically took a master's degree worth of studies at Naropa with Reb Zalman. And we started celebrating Shabbat every Friday night and not working on Saturday, and we really started getting into it. So then I was a Hindu-Christian, Jewish, Sufi, Buddhist, and that's sort of been my place. And Sheikh Nur said, you will receive the quintuple crown. He said, you will attain what is regarded as realization in all those traditions. So he gave me that sort of like big job to do. But what it's really about for me, and it's interesting you said you don't want me to talk about theology, because I couldn't. Because which theology would I speak of? I live in the place beyond religion where all traditions shine. And when you live in that space beyond religion, you can enter. You can enter in, you can participate from the depths of your heart in any tradition, but you're not bound by any one because you know the others. What happens is people go through a certain door, and they go through a certain door, and they have the aha, they have the darshan, they have the great experience, and they come back and they say, this is the door. What happened is I went through this door. Everyone should go through this door. But because I've been through all these doors, because I've seen the same light through all these windows, that's why I understand it. It's not about the door. It's not about the window. It's not about form. It's not about the theology. It's not about the belief system. It's not about the words we use to describe the undescribable. It's about the place that we come to when we go through any of those doors, or we look through any of those. There's the same light through all these different stained glass windows. Or Raghudas, my guru, once said, you're on the train going from Pune to Bombay. In the compartment, there are Hindus, there are Muslims, there are Sikhs, there are Jains, there are Christians. Some are eating veg, some are eating non-veg, and some are eating bread and butter, Western food. They will all get down at Bombay. But that was his very, very most important teaching. Not to be bound or limited by any one of these being better or more important. So that's in my faith journey, if it is, I guess it's faith. It's about this place where all the traditions shine and you can enter into the heart of each one. But my God is the human being, really. I think that the religion that we're really coming into is simply love and compassion and kindness, and to understand that our God is in everyone. It says that in the Epistle of John, it says, how can you say you love the God you do not see if you cannot love the brother that you see? And when you start off on the spiritual path, you think it's a journey of climbing up a mountain, and that all you have to do is get to the summit. But in fact, it's difficult. It takes everything, but it's not so difficult to get to that mountaintop. That's not the end of the journey, it's the beginning. When you summit that mountain, okay, great, you got to the mountaintop, you've experienced union with the black light of truth. And that's where every book, every text, every tradition leaves you. And that's when your actual life begins. And your actual life is when you come down the mountain. And you come back into the everyday life, into washing dishes, into having to make a living, into needing to be able to cross the road, into hearing about the stock market crashing or what. You come back into your actual life. That's actually the spiritual path, as I understand it. Which is where I found Sufism was the most helpful, because it talks about Marifat, the great city. At the end of the journey is not Hakikat, the black light of truth, the mountaintop. The end of the journey is living your everyday life with it, bringing the divine names, bringing the divine qualities in your everyday life. So, I tried to answer your question about where I come from. I cannot remember a time when I didn't think about God, or I can't remember a time when I didn't know that I had a mission. Looking back, I can't remember. My given name is Olivia, and there was no Saint Olivia's Day. And I thought, that's okay. I'm going to be Saint Olivia. And children are that's kind of very ambitious, but it was because I knew I had some kind of I always knew that I was here to serve. I always knew that I was here for people or to serve.
What's your earliest memory of some thought of God or having that mission? Was there some experience where that came to life?
Well, I do remember, because I went to my primary school when I was 5, was a church school, and I remember a day when it had showered, and they brought us outside, and they said to smell the rain, and we sung a little hymn. And I still remember that day, that God made the rain and the smell of the earth. So I think a lot of it was in connection with nature. But my parents reminisced about this. I was just been visiting them in England. They reminisced a lot about how I would dress up all my dolls and organize them for the great day. And I would issue invitations to all my friends to come to the great day. And in the great day, we would all wear white dresses and sit on the lawn and feast, because I was trying to get back to my world. I could remember my world, where I came from. I would cry and tell my father that I want to go back to my world. And many years later, I read a description of Tara Loka, the realm of Tara, the compassion goddess, and everyone was dressed in white and seated on this lawn, and I realized I always remembered coming from Tara Loka. It was an exact description of my world. So I just always remembered the other world. I can't say exactly an experience, although I think connecting through nature has been very important. No, I always did. I can't, it's like the air I breathe. I can't say that. It's just since, maybe because I was in an incubator, I was taken away from my mother and put in an incubator. Maybe I had to rely on God in the incubator. But it's hard to remember back then. I think there's been a couple of, I think it's more perhaps times when one doubts oneself. So when I was in, part of what happened when I was in India, I'd been told it was a Kundalini crisis, but it was diagnosed as a psychotic break. But I went into this I was in this village that I'd never been to before, and I ran unerringly to the Krishna temple and was pounding on the doors because it was locked and I wanted to get in and see Krishna. So I don't know if I really was psychotic, but it appeared like that. And then they gave me lots of really nasty medicine that made it so I could barely lift the food to my mouth or walk. Kind of immobilized by when I was taking that medicine was the only time in my life that I couldn't experientially feel that connection. And also you're bound to have some kind of a doubt when you think, I've come to India, I've put my trust in my guru when this happened to me. But then you have to find that. Most of all, you lose faith in your own mind when you watch your own mind fall to pieces, which is how you get that glimpse of what doesn't change. Unless or until everything falls apart, how are you really going to experience what never changes? Because you're always having some kind of reliance, at least on your own mind, at least on your own body, at least on your own experience. When that all fails you, when your own mind fails you, that then only you really have to touch what is beyond your mind. The other time, I think, was during that first phase in America. And it's a part in Bhagavad Gita where Arjuna asks Krishna, what happens to the yogi if he fails in yoga? Will he lose both this world and the next? And I got into this space, this what do you call it? I got in this place where I was entertaining this experience that I had lost this world, that I'd given up everything. Like I could have been, I'm a doctor. I mean, I could have had like all the things that most people usually have, that I was brought up to think that I was entitled to have, even though my parents didn't have them when they were children. I could have been that person who had all that money for your retirement or health insurance or recognition or anything that people in Western middle class people think, a car, like anything. And I didn't have any of those things. I was really sick at the time. And I didn't have money for medicine, and I was in this basement with asbestos, and, so I really, and then I wasn't having such a strong feeling of connection. And then I got that feeling. That's when I had that feeling of losing this world and the next. It's a state of mind. And you go through it, again, you have to come to this deeper kind of trust in the process. And the third thing was when I went through my menopause, and my thyroid also slowed down. And up till that point, my experience of meditation was you sit down, you take a few breaths, and you're in some form of samadhi, not to mean ultimate samadhi, but you're in some form of an altered state where you are meditating. And then when this happened with my menopause and my thyroid, I would sit down to meditate and nothing would happen. Nothing. Completely nothing. Just this complete flatness. And I just kept meditating. I just kept meditating every day for this whole time. And eventually, I guess maybe it changed because I take medicine for my thyroid now. And that's kind of changed the flatness. But again, it gets you underneath any idea of that you're supposed to sit on your cushion and something will happen. And you come into this other kind of a faith. So yeah, those are 3 times. Meaning. I'm most grateful for meaning. It's what I have and have always had that is the most missing piece to so many people. For all beings, happiness, peace in the world. It's such a big wish. That just reminded me of the Dalai Lama saying he's a simple monk. That that I'm a fellow human. Yeah, I have a message that the ultimate true nature of everything is nothing but love and compassion. And that's why I just want to be a portrait of a fellow human, because that's every single human being in the whole world is capable of actualizing love and compassion. Every single one of us. And that's really what our life is about. And it's the only thing that can make us happy. Cars won't make us happy. Houses won't make us happy. What are they called? 401ks? Those things won't make us happy. Only love and compassion can make us happy.